Hello again. Welcome to Class Evolution. Today we're going to be covering the Rogue. Now, the Rogue has gone through a lot of changes since its not introduction, but since its days in Second Edition. In Second Edition, the Rogue, well, to be plainly honest, it sucked. It was not really combat effective. It had to deal with facing and flanking rules, and for very little reward. Their big thing in Second Edition was the skills. They were the only ones that were allowed to use skills. That included, they were the only ones allowed to put points in. That included, climbing, hiding, stealthing, lockpicking, finding stuff, all of it. All those things, rogues only. So that made rogues useful. They made them wanted in parties, but most players that I know did not like to play them. Mainly because the rogue had very few hit die, very shitty THAC0 progression, there was no weapon finesse, and their sneak attack sucked. Their sneak attack was times 2 damage for like the first third of the game. So this meant that, and they only got the backstab, I believe it was called then, if they were flanking an enemy and the enemy was facing the other way, unaware of the rogue's presence. So that really, really limited the rogue in combat. I mean, you get into combat and you might as well just stop doing anything because you're going to die if you do much. So the rogue really only could do, skills. So that made the rogue bland and boring in a majority for a long running game, because as a player you want to be able to do stuff, and if all you can do is skills and you're in a standard game which is about 50% role playing, 50% dungeon crawl, you're not going to do shit. If half the game you're really going to be useless. So they had skills were cool. Skill system was alright, it was percentile roll. But ultimately the rogue, not the greatest long running character. That did not stop TSR from though releasing a very, very good source book for them. The Rogue Thief source book, I should say, is actually really well done. It's got thief jargon in it so that you can talk more like a thief. Rogue Can't, I believe it was called. Lots of very cool kits. Ways Thief Guild work. I mean, it was very well done. It really, really detailed how to be a rogue and how to role play one, and the kits were pretty cool, but it still could not fix the rogue glaring fail of being combat ineffective after like the first round. The thief then progressed up to being called the rogue when it moved into 3rd of 3.5. When it moved up, it gained actually some combat effectiveness with a sneak attack. Now, no longer requiring the enemy to be completely unaware of you, you just had to be flanking or to catch them flat-footed. So, right then and there, their combat capabilities went up, tenfold. As all they have to do is now have that fighter stay on the other side, and boom, they're good. Their THAC0 was replaced by base stack bonuses. Everything was in 3.5. And that progression rate was improved. And the rogue saw this newfound ability to actually do stuff in combat that it never had the chance to do before. Further improved with the introduction of skills to every class and the change of the system, the D20 system edition, skills became universal to everyone. Everyone could use them if they were trained in them, which at first would take away from the rogue, but then the rogue was given the most skill points in the game to play with. And, they get 8+ intelligence modifier. Most of the time after that, there's really not much you want to be doing. I mean, 8 skills, you've covered your spot and listen, your hide and stealth, and all that stuff. So 8 skills plus your intelligence gave you a good bit of room to pick what you wanted to do. So the rogue got a lot of new fancy stuff to play with. And it maintained that into Pathfinder, actually, if I recall. And I mean, sneak attack could get ridiculous. So, I mean, I think in the end you could deal sneak attack of plus 10d6, I believe it was. So, and that's a lot of damage on top of whatever magic item you have, on top of... Oh, and you could also now get weapon finesse. So no longer were you limited by your dex or your to hit. You get the weapon finesse feat, which would allow you to use your whatever melee weapon with your dex mod, so you wouldn't have to try and divide your points. This ended up making the rogue very, very effective, as in combat and still in the skill system. I mean, it was still the most useful because they had access to pretty much every skill in the game, whereas everyone else would be cross-classing. Then they also got some pretty cool prestige classes, which I hate the prestige class system, but they got some pretty cool ones. Shadow Dancers from Pathfinder. If you cross-classed into, I believe it was Paladin, you would get the Shadowbane Inquisitor, which was a really, really cool prestige class. If you went partial cleric, you could go, what was it? It's called Black Flame Zealot, which were kukri wielding zealots, which are really, really cool. And there was a lot of just rogue specific prestige classes, and they were all really, really well done. Well, most of them, they became very highly focused. So you take that as you will. They were very cool ultimately. And then the rogue made one more big progression with 4E. Now, with 4E, rogues became significantly more combat effective, as did really all classes. And they did lose some of their skill, if I recall correctly. They didn't get as... Wait. I believe they still retain their skill superiority. But the rogue made... With the balancing out system that 4E went with, the rogue lost some of its, I'm super special. They still had some really, really cool abilities. They were the only ones that could wield shuriken at D6s, I believe they are. So, I mean, right there, I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, you always picture these, I always want to be like, I want to use shuriken, and I'm like, well, they only deal a D4 damage, and I lose them when I'm done. Well, guess I'm picking something else. Because, I mean, who wants to really only throw a D4 plus, a D6 damage? Why not throw whatever? So, they got more impressive in the combat field, but less specialized in the skill field. As with the grouping of the skills down to, I believe it was from like 20-some to like 17, I want to say? 15, 10, something like that? I want to say it's like 17. I don't know why that number just popped in my head. So, they lost a little bit. Then they got some really cool Paragon paths, as they're called, which replace prestige classes with less requirements and were much cooler. I hate the prestige class system. I love the Paragon path system because it allows you to, when you hit Paragon level, you get to pick a path if you meet the requirements, which are like, I believe most of them revolve around, if any, it's like your race. So, I mean, that's about the only deciding factors, which is always really nice, especially because there's a lot of choices. There's only like one or two ever for a race, so it's like one Dragonborn, one, and then most of those are like only Dragonborn specific, not really class specific. But we then see the massive, all like different styles of play. You see brawler rogues emerge, to really fill that role of being a thug. Because beforehand, I mean, this concept of being a damagey, strength-based rogue was kind of meh. It's up in the air if it was really ever going to be useful. Because you had to sacrifice your armor class, and it, just wasn't worth it. Now they introduced a whole bunch of new ways to play them. The exploits. So, I mean, you got a lot of really cool things. So, I was happy with it. Their support system was good, as I said. If I had to say my preferred, if I was a rogue player a lot of the time, and I don't know. I'd have to say I'd prefer playing a. Well, I don't know because I enjoy a lot of 4E systems. I know a lot of people dislike it for a lot of reasons. You know, they think it's too video game as I believe it's too WoW esque. Some people it's just not D&D, and I really have come to enjoy 4E after playing it for so long because the things I don't like, I get rid of. Things I like, I keep. And most of the things I do like. And with my background having DM'd some second a ton of 3.5, so I mean, I have no problem with people being like, oh, it makes shitty DMs, and no. Shitty DMs make shitty DMs. I mean, it's not really the system that molds you. It's, what you read, who you play with, what type of person you really are. So, I'd have to say, though, my preferred version would be 4. And that's because I like being more combat effective. I can roleplay my ass off and care very little about the numbers on my sheet. But when combat does come around, I prefer to be combat effective. So I'll trade the numerical role-playing and substitute it with, real role-playing versus you can't roleplay combat. Just because you act out stabbing someone does not actually mean you will get a bonus. So I just say I prefer the 4E rogue. I believe they had more options in the long run. And I thought that the shit ton of skills that you had to deal with in previous editions became a bit overwhelming. So that's my thoughts. Leave your comments below so I can know your thoughts. Have a good one.